And we're back with you. Beyond the Headlines continues now. This is RJR 94 FM. I'm Dion Jacks Miller. We've had quite a few programs dealing with children in conflict with the law, how best to deal with them, how best to address their needs, and some of the shortcomings of the current system. A very important document sent to Parliament. It's from the Office of the Children's Advocate, and it's titled Focusing on the Uncontrollable Child, Recommendations to the Houses of Parliament. We're joined now by Children's Advocate Dan Gordon Harrison. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us. We're going to have her on in just a moment. And let me just remind you of our text line, which is 2854757, 2854757. And as I said, there are a number of things that are really, really important about this document. One is that it is grounded in law, meaning in Jamaica's various legal commitments. It goes through in detail the various the relevant articles, for instance, in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 37, which prohibits torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, and stipulates that the arrest, detention, or imprisonment of a child shall be in conformity with the law and shall be, listen people, used only as a measure of last resort and for the shortest possible time. Article 39 focuses on the obligation of state parties to ensure they adopt all appropriate measures to promote the physical and psychological recovery of a child victim and facilitate the social reintegration of the child. Article 40 speaks broadly to the administration of juvenile justice. It also speaks about the United Nations guidelines for the prevention of juvenile delinquency. It speaks about the Beijing rules, the United Nations standard minimum rules for the administration of juvenile justice. It looks at the so-called Havana rules, the United Nations rules for the protection of children deprived of their liberty. And among the provisions here that is stressed, that are provisions that are stressed, I beg your pardon, Rule 8, which proposes that the care of detained juveniles and preparation for their return to society is a social service of great importance. To this end, active steps should be taken to foster open contacts between the juveniles and the local community. We also have Rule 27, which elaborates on procedures that should be followed once a juvenile has been admitted to any juvenile facility. As soon as possible, each juvenile should be interviewed and a psychological and social report identifying any factors relevant to the specific type and level of care and program required by the juvenile should be prepared. We now have the Children's Advocate with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I was saying before you came on, this is such an important document for quite a number of reasons. But before I start getting all the text saying that, boy, we don't understand when pick the bad, they must lock them up. Let me just ask you to just explain for us, remind us of the underlying principle that's always followed when dealing with children, that is best interest of the child, and how that would have informed what you did here.
All right. Well, I'm happy you introduced the topic like that, Dion, because I think sometimes a lot of us in society, and I think different ones of us are guilty of it at different times, we tend to think, when children give problems, the best thing to do is to just put them in a box and get them out of the way so that well-thinking, productive members of society can get on with the business of life. But increasingly, studies have shown, and for those of us who have been exposed to it and who have taken the time to really look at it, it says that when you're dealing with a child really, and child here includes the adolescents who seem to be the ones, more targeted by this particular paper. A child really is the product of society, and they're influenced by several environmental factors and issues in the society that impact upon them. And so the thinking is, and the re-engineering of thought is that when you have a child presenting with behavioral problems, you have to look at the child within the context of the situation. And the question always has to be, how do we treat with the issues that this child has brought to the fore in keeping with the best interest principle? Children usually, based on the thinking, are entitled to a second chance, so to speak. And so the undergirding principle always has to be, how can you rescue this particular child from the path on which the child seems to be traveling to ensure that at the end of the day, when the child attains adulthood, you have a productive, well-adjusted member of society who can contribute to the advancement of society.
And, there are a number of things in here that really jump out at me. One of them, you stress over and over that issue, in fact, of assessment, of ensuring, in other words, not just taking the child, locking up him or her, and leaving it at that, but really getting to the underlying root of the problem. So tell me your specific recommendations in terms of if a child comes before the court, what needs to happen?
All right. Well, first off, my firm view, as expressed in the document, is that if a child presents with uncontrollable behavior, as it is called, it's important for persons to recognize that this isn't a true traditional criminal offense. What it is, it's a status offense. And I like to say to persons, and I think I included it in the article, that when we're at home and we have problems with our parents or we have problems with our spouses, we don't say, you know what, you're giving me problems, let me take you to the police station and get the judge to lock you up in court. In custody, even though sometimes we'd like to do that. The fact is, we can't do that. So if persons understand that this really is an offense, a status offense that's predicated on a behavioral issue, the greater question must be, what has caused this behavioral issue to manifest? Our research has shown that almost all the girls who are there exclusively for being uncontrollable have undetected and sometimes unaddressed traumatic episodes that affected them in the past that were never dealt with. And so this has caused them to act out. Some of them are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorders because of the inappropriate handling of these traumatic incidents. And so the acting out is really their ill-advised and inappropriate way of dealing with the stress that they're being faced with as a result of these unresolved traumatic issues. So one of the first recommendations is that any child who presents exclusively for that before the court must necessarily be assessed by a mental health professional to determine whether there are any underlying factors that have caused this behavior. And we think that if this assessment is done, then certainly the court will have at its disposal more material that can put it in a position to properly assess what is happening with the child, and also the intervention can be made from the outset in respect of the support services that this particular child may need to deal with the underlying problem.
Let me tell you, one of the thing that absolutely more than anything else jumped out at me reading this document is we've heard, for instance, that children who are in these institutions get education, their schooling is available to them. You say here, on average, the juveniles get taught for 2 hours per day?
Yes, 2 hours.
Oh, my goodness. Seriously. So talk to me there about that issue and your recommendation.
All right. Well, clearly, you're shocked, Dion.
I am. It just reminds me of the need to ask better questions. When we're told, for instance, yes, they're educated, the question clearly, therefore, should have been, for how many hours are you educating them?
Yes, because the contact hours are important. I don't wish to take anything away from the Department of Correctional Services. If you look at the document as well, you'll notice that I did note one particular success story that struck me. It was in relation to a child who had been admitted, and she says that she dropped out of school from she was at the primary level. And so she went into the system not knowing how to read, but because of the exposure to the instruction in the DCS, she was now able to read. So that's a success story.
Yeah, but the norm is that. I mean, one of the concerns with shift schools, as you would know, is that the students get on average about 5 hours of instruction per day, and that's seen as being inadequate.
Yes, right. So with 2, the need is there for greater contact hours. And in that regard, the recommendation that I made is that, we understand that it's not the kind of environment that a lot of teachers would love to be in terms of delivering instructions in these facilities.
To have 2,000 of them out of work?
Exactly. And apart from that, my recommendation specifically is that perhaps teachers who have retired but still have a love for teaching can be approached in respect of, if they would be willing to consider taking contracts to increase the number of contact hours that these children would have in the facilities.
Mrs. Gordon-Harrison.
That was one recommendation, yes.
We lost a little bit of time, so I'm out of time and I have to leave it here for today, but I'm going to ask you if we can contact you to ask you to come back another time, because there are many issues I still do want to talk to you about. And as I said, very, very important issue here. Is it online in case people do want to access it?
No, it's not online just yet, but we will get there. And what I can tell you is you can expect, along with other media houses, an invitation from me, because I think it's sufficiently important that the document is exposed to as many persons as possible. And so we will be having a session in which that will be done with the various media houses. So you can listen out for that.
News coming up right now. We're back with much more. Stay tuned.